Ethan Siegel, come on down. You are the
Oh,
next guest
yeah.
on The Bryce is Right. How you
Oh,
doing?
this is like going to make my 6-year-old dreams come true when I was like dreaming that someday Rod Roddy would call my name, but it's Bryce Cornell instead. I
There you
will come
go.
on down. Welcome. Welcome to me. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I think that the story of what we know and how we know it, this picture of the universe, this is something that I think should be a story that everyone who's curious about it, this story should be available to them. So if you've got any questions that are like deep or hard or complicated and you're like, oh, I didn't think I'd be able to understand that, ask, because I want you to understand it, and I think you can.
Well, you see what I mean? Pick the right guy. I picked the right astrophysicist to be able to talk to a lay audience, which is what my audience is. So, so I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to be talking about cosmology, and I think that that's a term that is used a lot in kind of the circles that I run with online, but I'm not sure if it's fully understood. So the first question, very basic. I just want to make it pretty clear about what we're talking about. What is cosmology, and what's the difference between cosmology and astronomy?
So first off, I'm pretty happy that you asked me what's the difference between cosmology and astronomy, and not what's the difference between cosmology and cosmetology. Because the difference between cosmology and cosmetology is Planck's constant, not Mach's factor. But the difference between cosmology and astronomy is that astronomy is when we look out at the universe, what do we see? What do we see out there, and what's it all about? What's it made of? What can we learn is going on from looking at it? When we talk about cosmology, we're asking a very specific aspect of astronomy. We're basically saying, okay, when we look out at the universe, what is the whole thing doing? What is it made of? How did it get to be the way it is? How was it born? And what is its fate? We're asking big questions about the cosmos as a whole when it comes to cosmology. So astronomy is a part of cosmology because it informs, from the observational side, it informs us about, okay, what do we see when we look out at the universe? But we also have this whole theoretical side based in physics where we say, okay, here are the laws of physics, let's apply them to the universe, and then let's put that whole picture together between the laws of physics we know and the astronomical stuff we observe, which falls into observational cosmology. Can we synthesize all of this together, and what kind of picture do we put together? And we can do this about tiny, tiny aspects like individual particles or subatomic processes that happen. And we can do this on the largest cosmic scales, galaxies, galaxy clusters, the cosmic web, or even the universe as a whole.
So it sounds like cosmology is really much broader, that astronomy is more of a subset of cosmology, whereas you're astronomy, you're just looking, you're studying the universe through what you see, but in cosmology you're actually making predictions about where things came from, what their end is, and all of that.
That's one way of looking at it. I actually look at it as cosmology is a subset of astronomy. Like, I look at astronomy as astronomy is really broad, because astronomy, if you are building an instrument, you're an astronomer. If you are analyzing data that someone else took, you're an astronomer. If you're making theoretical predictions about what happens in astrophysical environment, you're an astronomer. And if you're the one looking through the telescope or making your computerized stuff look through a telescope, you're also an astronomer. A cosmologist is really concerned with answering specific large-scale questions about the universe. So for me, I would say, a subset of astronomer is astrophysicist, and a subset of astrophysicist is cosmologist. And to me, if you want to say like, well, cosmology, that's the best one, I mean, sure, I'll take that. That's why I went into it, because for me, it was the best one. But for other people, other aspects of astronomy that have very little to do with cosmology, like individual stars or individual galaxy clusters or gas or dust, other people are interested in those things, those are just as worthwhile pursuits as cosmology is, even though most of their applications aren't cosmological in nature.
I'm an astronomer. I like it. You talked about why you got into it, and that's kind of where I wanted to go next. How did you get into this? Where did the interest come from? And at what age did you become interested in science? When did you know you wanted to do this?
Yeah, those are not questions that have the same answer. Like, I was interested in science when I was young. I was interested in lots of things. I remember when I was a kid getting a microscope and being amazed that I could look at these things on these little slides and actually see this whole universe of things that was happening below what my eyes could see. But if you magnified it enough, you could see it. I remember waiting for the day where my dad would cut himself shaving so I could get some blood for a slide to try and see the red and white blood cells.
Wow.
But I also remember I grew up in New York, and I got a telescope. And I had no idea how to use this telescope. So I'm like 6 years old with a cheap, crappy telescope in New York.
Mm-hmm.
So what do? I'm like, oh, I know. I'll wait till the moon is full, and then I'll go look at the full moon. Pro tip, don't look at the full moon as your introduction to looking through a telescope. What a waste. You should always, if you're going to observe the moon, the best place to observe the moon is what we call the terminator, the difference between night and day on the moon, because that's where you see the most what we call relief. That's where you see the craters on the moon, the shadows on the crater walls, the stark difference between night and day. If you're going to look at the moon, that's the best way to do it with a telescope, is look at the edge between night and day. If you look at a full moon, it's day everywhere on the moon, so you're blowing it. But for me, I had sort of a monumental moment. Like, I'd always been interested in math and science, and school was a good time for me for most of my childhood. But I remember being like 11 years old, and we went upstate. And upstate...
You're from the Bronx, right?
I was born in the Bronx. It's where I went to high school. I also spent a lot of time in Yonkers, New York, which we will often call the Lost Borough, which is just north of the Bronx.
I'm from Brooklyn and Queens, so I kind of Wikipedia stalked you and realized that you were from the same city.
Oh,
so,
yeah, we are. I went to Bronx Science, if you're familiar with that high school. Yeah,
I am. I didn't get in.
No, I didn't. I'm gatekeeping. Boo.
So I imagine.
Anyway, I'm 11 years old. I'm upstate, and I look up, and I couldn't see the Milky Way or anything, but for me, being able to see like hundreds of stars was revolutionary. And I remember laying out on this grassy field, and all of a sudden, I grabbed the grass as I'm laying on my back. I grabbed the grass with my fingers really hard because it was so disorienting to have this huge canopy of stars above me for the first time that I actually felt like I was going to fall up into the space that I was looking into. And it was actually a little frightening and a little disorienting. And then I sort of realized, like, whoa, like there's something that I can't explain that's kind of calling me about this. And as I learned more about mathematics, I started to ask these weird questions like, hey, you know how if you're on the surface of the earth and you go far enough in one direction, you'll loop around the circumference of the earth and come back to where you started? What if space is the same way?
Are you trying to tell me that the earth is not flat?
Well, we can get into that if that's what you want.
No, I don't.
If that's where you want to go, we can get into that.
Absolutely.
I did write a piece a few years ago addressed to Shaquille O'Neal about how you can prove the earth is flat. Just kidding. How you can prove it's not flat. Because he famously came out as a flat, Okay, we're going to get into some weeds. So I'll say I don't think he was. I think that was him joking around. I think when Steph Curry said something about it, I think he was joking around. I think a lot of people who say these things say it for the same reason that a lot of people when we were very young were like embarrassed somehow if they got an A in school. Like, you would want to hide that because you might get bullied for it, or people might think you were a nerd, or people might, like, somehow we've decided that being a high achiever is something to be ashamed of, and that being mediocre or even below mediocre is something that makes you cool.